Good afternoon everyone, or good morning depending on where you are in Australia. My name is Nick Carne. I'm a member of the Wine Communicators of Australia National Board, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, the third for 2013 in the Consumer Perception stream we're running in partnership with the Grape and Wine Research and Development Corporation. I'm joined today by Anne Duncan from the GWRDC and of course by our presenter, Dr. Armando Corsi from the University of South Australia. And, as always, Jen Barwick, WCA's Program Manager, will be working behind the scenes, taking your feedback. If this is your first webinar, you'll be pleased to know that as long as you can see the presentation on your screen and hear our voices, you don't need to do any more. However, if you would like to ask a question or simply make a comment, and that's the beauty of the webinar concept, there are three ways you can do so. You can use the message box on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Just type and send a message as you would an email. It will be visible to all webinar participants and they will have the ability to respond themselves or to add a further comment. Alternatively, you can use Twitter or just email Jen. Both addresses are on the screen now. Ask your questions at any time and we'll feed them through at the appropriate time. Webinars work really well when options and opinions are flowing. Today's session is part of the GWRDC's extension to industry around the range of consumer-focused projects it's funding at the moment. And from a WCA perspective, it's a great way to get more information out to wine businesses around the country in a convenient way. Our first session with the GWRDC presented current consumer thinking about Chardonnay. The second looked at using live streaming to turn brand websites into virtual cellar doors. And today we will be looking at some of the latest consumer research coming out of the all-important China market. And so to our presenter. Dr. Armando Corsi is a Senior Research Associate at the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute for Marketing Science at UniSA. He has broad research interests and expertise around consumer behaviour towards wine and food products, packaging, labelling and premium and luxury products. Over the past 2 years he's carried out a number of projects with the GWRDC and currently has a strong focus on China. Armando has also authored more than 20 refereed publications and trade articles and is a member of the editorial committee of the Wine and Viticulture Journal here in Australia and the scientific committee of the International Journal of Wine, Economics and Policy. So it sounds like he knows his stuff. Armando, welcome, and we look forward to hearing your new China insights.
Thank you very much, Nick, and good afternoon and good morning for those of you who are still in Western Australia. For those who don't know our institute, the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute, we sit in between a commercial and an academic organization. As a commercial organization, we have a range of small, medium and large companies in Australia and overseas for whom we run specific ad hoc research, and we also have our own corporate sponsorship program, of which GWRDC is a member of, and this year we have already successfully run a couple of seminars about general consumer shopping behavior and the role of promotion in wine consumption and buying. And I would be happy to talk more about that if time permits and if you are interested to hear more about this. But of course, as an academic institution, we really focus on the fact that all our research has to have a very rigorous and scientific approach. And as part of today's presentation, we are going to explore some of the research that we have been conducting this year together with the GWRDC. Part of our mission, if the slides move on, Yep. Fantastic. So part of our mission is to discover empirical laws of marketing, and this sounds sometimes strange to mix the word scientific with marketing, because we have heard a lot of one-off studies that when replicated by other people in other markets, in other situations, they generate completely different results. But we think that this should not be the approach that we should use in marketing, because to just make a comparison, what if every time that we try to see what's the reaction with glucose and yeast, we would not obtain alcohol and carbon dioxide? It would be pretty much of a mess. And we think that this should be the same approach that we use in marketing when we conduct market research, especially in consumer behavior. We've been lucky enough to have the GWRDC supporting 4 big projects that we have been conducting since the beginning of this year. The first of which is what we call the China Wine Barometer. The China Wine Barometer is a project that we conduct together with Wine Intelligence to understand what are the attitudes, perception and behaviors that Chinese consumers have toward wine. This is a 3-year project. We just started this year looking at, first of all, the on-premise consumption that people have about wine, and just last week we got the data relative to the second wave of data collection, which is going to look into off-premise, in-store consumption, attitudes and behavior. The second project, which we call the Chinese Lexicon Project, was born with a very simple question. How can you say that the wine tastes of blueberry if you've never seen a blueberry in your life? Therefore, the objective of this project is trying to understand whether and if a Chinese equivalent terminology could be a better vehicle to understand and to communicate wine to Chinese consumers, of course, in China and potentially even in Australia. We have a third project now, which is looking at consumption behavior and educational techniques, especially directly to international Asian students in Australia. Part of these results have been just published into the latest issue of the Wine and Viticulture Journal, and we will soon release some other results in due course, as also Anne will tell you probably later on today. And we have a fourth project which is looking into different leveraging techniques to increase the experience and the salience that Chinese consumers have about Australia when, of course, they come in the country. The focus in particular of today's presentation is first of all on some of the main results that we got from the China Wine Barometer, with some general understanding of what are the regions, grape variety, price point and countries that Chinese consumers are aware of when they think about wine, and also looking at the motivation that bring people to drink wine. Then we're also looking more specifically into what are the main choice drivers that make people choose wine in the on-premise sector, to end with the perception that Chinese consumers have for different countries and region of origin. After this, I'm going to speak a little bit more about the Chinese Lexicon Project, in particular stage 1 of the Chinese Lexicon Project, which we have now completed, and we're also about to complete and release the report also for the second stage. So, if we have to look at, first of all, what are the elements that people are mostly aware of when they think about wine, the way in which we asked this question was giving a list of, as you can see, countries of origin, grape varieties, region of origin, and price point, asking consumers to tick all of the elements that they are aware of, so all the different regions, countries, grape variety, and so on. The results have been pretty clear. France, Bordeaux, and Cabernet Sauvignon seems to be the leader in terms of what Chinese consumers are aware of. Australia, we can see, doesn't see that bad. I mean, it's in 4th position, but of course, as you can see, it's 20% less chosen, for example, than France. Probably the situation is even worse in terms of regional awareness, because while Bordeaux has an awareness of 87%, Barossa Valley sits quite back at 54%. Of course, there are many other regions that have much less awareness, but still we can see that there is a gap of 30%, which hopefully and maybe needingly Australia needs to fill. In terms of grape varieties, when we speak about France, when we speak about Bordeaux, probably Sava Sandir, the Cabernet Sauvignon, is the grape variety that leads the market in terms of awareness, followed by Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, and Riesling, but again, we can see there is 30% less. What are the price points that people consider for wine when they have to choose wine in the on-premise sector? We can see the price point of 250 RMB which is pretty much equivalent to 40 Australian dollars, is the price point that people have in mind when they have to think about wine in the on-premise sector. Why do Chinese consumers drink wine? And before I show you the results, I just want to make sure that we understand how we have collected the data. The results that you're going to see are, if you like, relative scores. So the first item that I'm going to show you has a level of 100 point, and all other scores are reference point to the most important element. As you can see, most of the people in China, they think they drink wine because it's good for their health. And secondly, because it helps people to relax and to create a friendly atmosphere. But as you can see, the idea of creating a friendly atmosphere and also to relax score almost 40% less important than drinking something that is good for your health. The taste of wine closely follows with the idea of creating a friendly atmosphere, and later on we see all the other items which are progressively less important. Very good question. Sorry, I forgot to say that. We're talking here about quite a big sample. Because we conduct this experiment in parallel, not completely together, but in parallel with wine intelligence, our sample size mimics the sample size that wine intelligence uses, which is, in this case, 913 people. We aim always at 1,000 people in China, and they're located in 6 different cities: Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Wuhan, Chengdu, and Shenzhen. Of course, with different percentages due to the size of the cities, and we know the consumption of wine is different between different cities. And our sample is pretty much equivalent in terms of socio-demography to the wine intelligence sample. Now the good question about Shiraz. Shiraz, unfortunately, sits much less behind. We are the awareness of Shiraz is about 40%, around 40%. So it sits much less than the other grape varieties.
Armando, can I just ask you, under the motivations, did any of that surprise you? I think we read a lot about the fact that it's related to health in China, and I think about the concept of a special occasion, but up at 2 and 3, this concept of help me relax and creating a friendly and relaxed atmosphere.
Sure. Well, it didn't surprise me too much, in a sense that, especially we see for women in particular, but not exclusively, wine is considered an healthy beverage, and I think this is a strong point that probably we should make even more, not just in the Chinese market, but probably even more in the Australian market, when we hear more and more, especially from the Health and Medical Association, this idea of trying to put everything together. All the alcoholic beverages are just one alcohol that is dangerous. Probably it's not, and of course we in the wine industry believe that it's not, but trying to communicate that to those that are not live and breathe wine every day, I think it's a challenge that we really need to stress more and more in the next years to come. So, in terms of the drivers, we used here the same methodology. So again, you would see the most important element that will have a value of 100 and all the other elements that are relative scores to that. The main element that drives the choice of wine in the on-premise sector is the fact that they tried the wine before and they liked it. So we see the importance of the previous experience that somebody has with wine. And look, I think that this is something important, and to make an analogy, is always, and maybe sometimes for us, the first time we approach a beverage or a food or something that we've not tried before, we need first a previous experience to understand whether we really like this product or not. So certainly it's important that we encourage, I think, our winemakers and producers to insist in this idea of making people try the wine so that they can try that another time. And in fact, you can see that the second most important element is the fact that the wine has been suggested by somebody else sitting at the table, probably somebody else that tried the wine. So even if it's not your direct experience with wine, it's somebody else's experience with wine that make people choose wine in that market. And the third most important element is the fact that the wine matches well with the food. After this, we see a group of three elements, which are the fact that the wine has good value for money, and that good value for money, if you remember the slide that I just presented before, probably sits around this 250, 300 renminbi. Of course, region of origin and then brand. I don't have all the results relative to the off-premise analysis, but I can already tell you that some of the analysis that we've done using pretty much the same items but are applied into the off-premise sector are showing something different, where the idea of brand, region and grape variety, together with vintage and gold medals, are probably the most leading elements for the choice of wine off-premise. So we can see, and this is probably something not very surprising in the sense that we see this in every market. There is a difference in the way in which people choose wine off-premise versus on-premise. Where the wine is mostly consumed, well, still is on-premise, especially value-wise. But certainly the off-premise market is growing. Off-premise market is growing. At the moment, we see, particularly in specialized wine stores, where people can get probably more suggestions. One thing that impressed me a lot when I was in Shanghai in March was that as soon as you move into any supermarket aisle, you have somebody in the store, a staff member that comes and almost attack you, they grab you, but not really to give you a suggestion, but to really push you towards some label, some brand that probably they've been told that they need to sell more. So you really don't have much freedom to walk around and choose wine. So certainly in the specialized stores, you can see that there is a better way to communicate wine and to stimulate people to choose the product. Moving on, the third part that I would like to talk about are the perceptions that people have about different regions of origin and countries of origin. That's okay. The way in which we have set up this part of the study was by giving people a list of items. The one that you can see on these slides, what we call perceptions for example, wine tasting good, or wines that are easy to drink, or complex wines, and so on and so on. We have different product dimensions in terms of the product per se, the labeling style, different wine styles, environmental sustainability, packaging, and so on and so on. And on the different columns, we have displayed a range of different countries of origin. France, China, Italy, Australia. Those that fit in one slide, but we also had Spain, Chile, New Zealand, and California, US. Asking, and people, they simply have to tick what are the elements that people think that are associated with each of the items that you see down the rows. Once we collect all this data, we calculate the average number of ticks that every country, and later on you will see every regions receive. And once we calculate the average, we generate what we call a deviation. So we see how many times in percentage value some items are ticked more or less than the average. Once we have that, we generate a graph like the one that you see here, where all the items that you see above the blue line, so all the green items, means that these items are positively associated with that item more than 5% more than the average. So these are all the elements that stand up for that particular country or that particular region more than the average. all the items that you see below the line are all the elements that are negatively associated, so less than 5% compared to the average, are all the elements that you see below the line. Don't worry about the location, so it doesn't matter if the items are shifted to the left or to the right. The reason why they are to the left or to the right is simply because otherwise they would just clutch all in the same point that they would be impossible to see. So let's look at the results. Country of origin perception. The perception of France is really the perception of a country that makes elegant wine. As you can see, I will just generate a red dot. As you can see here, elegant wines that are made in great varieties that they like. They are produced in distinct wine regions, better to drink without food, suitable for special occasion, expensive, and so on. And of course, when they think about France, as you see all the red dots below, are wines that of course are not boring, that are not suitable for casual dining, that are not good to drink at home, that are not too high in alcohol. So all the elements that you see below are elements that are not really much associated when they think about France. Italy, certainly not many associations, so meaning that probably Italy sits in between and together with many other regions, but still we can see some positive deviation in terms of wines that are suitable to drink at dining restaurants, good to give as gift and expensive, not boring, not suitable for a casual dining out, not good to drink at home, and strange enough, not maybe very much associated with red wines. I'm talking here as an Australian despite my accent, so I didn't want to bias the results in any way. China. Well, again, China has a strong association, so there are many elements that are very positively associated with China, but the opposite, mostly of which are opposite to the French association. So for example, in this case, Chinese wines are thought more as wines that are traditional, maybe a bit boring, good to drink at home, easy to understand. Where does Australia sit? Quite dramatic, I think, for us. Australia doesn't stand out for anything. We're not saying that there are not people that select Australia for a range of different reasons, but when we compare the results of Australia with the average, we can see that it doesn't stand much up. Unfortunately, the only element where it stands up, but negatively, so there is a less than average association with some of the items, is the idea of a country that produces red wine. And we believe that this is quite risky, considering that 85% of all the Australian wine export to China are made by red wine. As you can see also below, Spain, Chile, USA, and New Zealand, again, they all sit pretty much in the middle.
So should we be worried about this at this stage of our development in the Chinese market?
If you allow me, Nick, I will answer to the question in a while, because to me, what he's saying now is not risky, but it should ring a bell. Australia sits now somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't want to get stuck in the middle, there is something that needs to be done, and probably there are two routes that we can take: a premium route or a very commercial, volume-oriented route. I will show you the results in a while to answer the question, because I have some ideas, but I think the results will show them a little bit better. Right. Moving forward, in terms of the analysis that we have for regions, again, Bordeaux, as you can see, the analysis of regions doesn't generate many strong positive or negative association in terms of deviations, but still, Bordeaux is known for making red wines, wines that you would recommend to a friend, wines that are better to drink without food, and so on and so on. Let's move to Ningxia. We selected this region of origin in China because it's probably the most iconic and premium wine producer in terms of regions in China. And again, wines that are pretty much like the associations that we have before for China, wines that are a bit boring, traditional, easy to drink, but you can see that there is quite a strong perception that Chinese consumers have about this region of origin. Barossa. Unfortunately, again, Barossa doesn't stand out much, and we know that Barossa, of all the wine regions, Australian wine region is the region that Chinese consumers are most aware of, doesn't stand out much. And for the few items that stand out are wines that are maybe not considered traditional, but they don't have easy to understand label, and once again, a region that is not very much associated with the production of red wine, which again we think is a bit risky and maybe should suggest that something else should be done. Going back to the question that Nick asked me before, another analysis that we have done on this data was to group all the items that we've shown before into two categories: the commercial items, something like good for dining at home or maybe boring, traditional, and so on, versus other items like are more complex, they come in great varieties that I like, are elegant, are expensive, and so on and so on. And we have produced a graph that shows what is the inclination, if we want to say, of different regions of origin towards a perception of being a commercial wine producer or a fine wine producer. In line with what we said before, you can see how much France is much more shifted the perception towards a producer of fine wines, opposite to China, which is mostly perceived as a commercial wine producer. You can see the perception of Australia here. We are at a border, we are at a crosspath now, we are at the watershed. Australia in 2013 today probably sits somewhere in the middle. Somebody thinks that is more a commercial wine producer, somebody thinks that is more a fine wine producer. Our personal experience and the knowledge that we have about the Australian market probably suggests that Australia has to take, willing or nilly, more a premium route, because competing on volumes, we saw that it's a very tough battle and arena where you can put yourself, while taking a fine wine approach probably can have more advantages than disadvantages. And maybe you see down here to the right that many other regions share kind of the same perception that Australia has, but even due to the relative distance that we have with China, probably we can do something better than many other countries in terms of how we can reach Chinese consumers in China. A couple of questions. Oh yes, these results are all, of course, all available at a country level, and an expansion of all these results are available in the GWRDC Innovators Network, where, of course, the presentation is much longer, and very soon, otherwise GWRDC will be very angry at me, we will also release the results relative to the second round of the China Wine Barometer, which I said before is all going to be related to the off-premise retail consumption.
This is probably a good time to bring in Anne Duncan from the GWRDC. Anne is an R&D program manager. Some of the early results of this work from Armando have been showcased at workshops around Australia. I just wondered, I guess a lot of people sitting in front of their computers now are sort of trying to put all this detail together and work out what the message is for them. You were at the workshops, Anne. What were the questions, what were the areas of interest? And I think, what are the take-home messages that people were getting from this and that you're hearing back from them since the workshops?
I think what I got from the workshops and sitting there for listening to a number of Australian wine regions talk, I think there's an amazing positivity and optimism towards the potential of the Chinese industry and potential of China as a trading partner. I think a lot of our brands and our winemakers don't necessarily know how to tap into that market, what to do in that market. And I guess that was GWRDC's goal, was for this research done by Dr. Corsi to get out to our levy payers. So what we actually did was, in those workshops, we looked at how brands and managers would actually use the data and the information that was provided through GWRDC and through the research. Ultimately, what we got from different participants was that their next steps would be to research the country and the culture. We have the data, but now we need to know how to use it. So the next step for them was, or for a majority of them, was to actually research who they were doing business with, what kind of culture they were stepping into, to better understand how to do business. Then another main theme was that people were actually looking at focusing not on China as an entire country, but on one province or on one city. So really focus on one specific part of the culture and one specific, region to trade with. Then the third thing that came out was a number of people that were involved in the workshop didn't necessarily have a plan in relation to China. And the breadth of the opportunity that exists requires detailed planning. So that's what also we were getting, I guess what we were hearing was that people were going away from workshops saying, right, I need to do some more research on the culture, I need to focus on one province or on one city, and then I need to develop a plan.
Armando, to what extent are we still trying to get the Chinese to pick wine ahead of another form of alcoholic beverage, as opposed to selecting Australian wine ahead of another form of wine?
Still the challenge, I agree with you, Nick. The challenge is, first of all, to make them shift from other beverages, tea. Beiju, I think it's more a myth. Certainly, especially the male population is into Beiju a lot. But the challenge at this stage is mostly to switch from teas or maybe beer to wine. And that, I think, is the first step. And it goes along well with many theories that we have about shopping behavior. In a sense, if we want to grow the customer base of people that drink wine, first of all, we should encourage them to drink wine instead of something else. Within this umbrella, though, we know that every time somebody approaches any product, but in particular wine, you start as an empty book, where the first author that starts writing on it as a mark, as a style that you learn from. I can say just from my personal experience, being born and grow in Italy meant that I had the chance to drink many Sangioveses, many Chianti, many styles of wine that for my palate, my taste. Moving to Australia, it was a fantastic discovery because I moved from lighter styles of wine to much more powerful wines, and now every time I go back home, the first wines that I try are always a bit too light, let's say. Certainly the fact that we're able, especially in what are now Tier 2 and Tier 3 and 4 cities, to grow the awareness of Australian wine, it's a challenge, but probably it's where we have to go. Markets which are already famous, like Beijing and Shanghai, probably those ones, we need to be there because this is where most of the market happens. But the ability to go in smaller, more regional, if you like to say, cities, which still will have those 7 or 8 million people, will probably be the next step for Australia to grow, especially for the younger generation, as I will show you in a while.
A couple of interesting questions come through. The first one, this illustrates to me that it is the producers that drive perceptions, not the region, that regions become respected through the brand labels producers are offering. Your thoughts on that?
Yes, well, certainly brands have an important role in a sense that bigger brands have the chance to enter in the market earlier and with a bigger distribution of product both in the retail and the on-premise market. So brands have, in a sense, the bigger brands have probably the responsibility to build the image after which all smaller brands can come afterwards. But at the same time, we can see that when we call, and what we call brand, at this stage, certainly in 2013, are still the traditional concept of brand per se. But like any market, because we've seen that in the UK market, we've seen that in the US market, once the population starts to be more aware about brand, then brand becomes something else. The brand can become the region, the brand can become the country, the brand can become the great variety. And so there is a path in there, but certainly at this stage, the role of brand is critical for the growth of wine in that particular market.
Another question for Anne or Armando. Is it a case to simplify our marketing efforts to better suit the Chinese market, overcome the difficulties and grow awareness?
Just start first?
I think.
Well, simplification, but not making too simplified, in a sense that we don't want to say that there is, like, 5 golden rules that you can use and every time they will work like clockwork. But certainly having a more simplified strategy where we keep 2 main concepts into account. For a brand to grow, you should focus more in growing your customer base rather than selling more to the existing customers. So in a sense, instead of trying to sell more cases of wine to the people that already buy our wines, we should try to reach the people that don't buy us yet. And secondly, focusing on the fact that instead of trying to get more people to become loyal to us, trying to make our product available in as many places as possible. Loyalty, unfortunately, is a false myth in marketing. We are not more or less loyal to one brand or another. But if we are in a particular situation and we want to buy wine for a particular occasion, if the wine is there, we're going to buy it. If the wine is not there, we're not going to buy it. So it's more the idea of being there volume-wise and perception-wise for the Chinese consumers.
Great. Let's turn to the second project we wanted to talk about, officially the Chinese Lexicon Project, but essentially it's about what words Chinese consumers use to describe wine.
Yes, exactly. As I said before, Australia did already a lot in terms of trying to reach the Chinese consumers, even in terms of education, description, and so on. But, and I'm saying this without really any criticism, what we've done so far was a translation, in the best case, was a translation of the same flavors that we use in Australia or in Western markets, of our terms into Chinese. But still one problem remains. If you've never seen a blueberry in your life, even if it's written in Chinese, in Mandarin, you still have no idea of what the product is about. So what we've done is a 2-stage process. Today I'm going to talk about stage 1 and I'm going to give some preliminary results of what we've done later on. In the first stage of the project, we need to understand what are the Chinese terms, specific descriptors, so specific fruits, vegetables, other types of food, and so on. The Chinese consumers use to describe wine, of course, together with some generic descriptors, so smooth, astringent, sour, and so on. And in the second stage, we took the results of stage 1 to generate a comparison, trying to understand whether the use of Western descriptors or the Chinese equivalent of these Western descriptors are better suitable or able to make people talk about wine, like the wine, and so on. Stage 1 of this research consisted in 12 focus groups that we run in 3 cities in China, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Chengdu. In each city, of course, we run 4 focus groups with both males and females, different age groups, so younger population or a little bit older population up to 50 years old. And during this focus group, people had the chance to try different wines. So we gave them a combination of white wines, red wines, sparkling wines, and dessert wines, together with a list of other questions, asking them to describe these wines for us. What are the results that we got? In terms of generic descriptors, we can see that starting from sparkling wines, the main generic words that people use to describe wines, to describe sparkling wines, are, of course, sparkling, but also refreshing, sweet, fruity, sour, thick. So some of the words that sometimes we also use in our terminology to describe sparkling wines. Maybe a bit shocking is this big "don't like it" in association with white wines. Before all the white wine producers are scared or freaks out about this, I think I need to make I need to explain this a little bit more. I'm not suggesting at all that white wines have no potentiality in China, but it's a cultural issue relative to the way in which you consume white wines. We like our white wines relatively cold, 12, 14 degrees. And this is not the way in which Chinese consumers generally drink their beverage. Tea is usually a very hot beverage, and so most of the "don't like it" is actually more related to the temperature, the fact that the feeling of wine at the first impact was quite strange. Yes, very important things. All the wines that we made them try were Australian wines, yes, and of course we tried to carefully select wines that were representative. So there were 16 wines in total, 4 whites, 4 reds, 4 dessert, and 4 sparkling. Trying to balance as much as possible different price points, different regions of origin, different countries of origin. So yes, we try to make it as balanced as possible. In terms of red wines, the most common words have been wines that are strong, astringent, fruity with a sweet aftertaste, and maybe obviously, in terms of dessert wines, the idea of having sweet wines, fruity wines, and wine with good aromas are probably the most important descriptors that we have for these types of wines. But let's now look at the specific terminology, specific fruit and flavors that Chinese consumers use to describe the different wines. Starting with sparkling wines, we can see that most of the wines has been described with, first of all, pomelo. 67% of these people ticked the word pomelo when they had to try the wines, followed by, not very far, by kaffir lime, jasmine tea leaves, jackfruit guava, lemongrass cantaloupe, and so on with the others. I just want to say that these are the top 10 descriptors. We started with a much wider range. Actually, we started with almost 40 descriptors per type of wine, but we cut down into 10 because we know, even from sensory analysis and general descriptors, that there is a very limited percentage of the population that is actually able to describe wine with such level of detail. So we thought, well, let's focus on the specific terms that we can use in all our communication material. Moving on to white wine descriptors, again, kaffir lime, pomelo, and lemongrass are the top 3, but again, kaffir lime and pomelo are the 2 most important descriptors for white wines in China. In terms of red wines, that was probably for me the funniest part, because also of all the exports that Australia does in China. You can see that Yang Mei, Chinese author, Chinese red bay, fresh wolfberry, dry wolfberry are some of the most common descriptors for red wines in China. And finally, for dessert wines, we move back to the same descriptors that we use for sparkling and whites, but due to the sweet nature of the product, we can see now a change in the ranking, where now jackfruit, longan, but also cantaloupe, mango, star fruits, Asian pear, now jumps in because of the, as I said, the nature of the product. The interesting thing here now is the following. What we've done, we have taken all these top 10 descriptors, and we've run what we call if you like, a traditional sensory analysis project using 3 central location tests, again in Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Chengdu. We have selected 14 wines, 5 red wines, 4 whites, 3 sparkling, and 2 dessert wines. which have been sensory characterized by our colleagues Patricia Williamson and Lee Francis at the Australian Wine Research Institute. These wines have been given to Chinese consumers, again, in China, in these 3 cities, blind tasting. But what we've done was we have split the sample in 2 groups. One group received received a list of generic terms and Western descriptors, which are the Western equivalent of these Chinese descriptors that I just showed you. And the other group received the same list with the same items, but instead of it being the Chinese equivalent, we gave the Western equivalent. So, for example, if one group received Yang Mei, the other group received strawberry. If one group received kaffir lime, the other group received lemon. And with those ones, we were able to see what are the items that people tend to choose more when they have associated different products. The results are going to be available very soon, but if Anne allows me, some top-of-the-line results are showing that, of course, generic terms in general seems to be more important, and they're ticked in general more often than specific descriptors when it comes to wine. Certainly, we know that this is, a general, traditional way of behaving, because every time you look at a wine, the first thing you say is how much the wine is, smooth or light, etc., before moving into the descriptors. But interestingly enough, we found and we were able to see that there is an equivalent. So instead of just going with our sixth sense, with our perception of what could be the equivalent of a Chinese terms, what is the equivalent of a Chinese term in our Western terminology, now we are able to have a scientific proof that the equivalent exists. And why is this important? This is important because depending who you're talking to, if your clients or the people that drink your wine have more or less knowledge about wine per se, you can decide now whether you want to use a Chinese terminology or you want to use a Western terminology. Certainly, we found that for some products, in particular white wines, the Chinese descriptors seems to work a little bit better. At this stage, for red wines, the Western descriptor seems to work a little bit better. However, the sample that we've interviewed have been people that have been already exposed to wine. So it might be interesting to possibly conduct this study again on people that are really novice to the wine world to see whether maybe the use of Chinese words works better.
I was going to ask the question whether this concept of linking a drink to a different flavour, which we're used to in the wine drinking world, that you can taste whatever fruit is that something that the crowd embraced? They got the whole idea of saying, well, this wine tastes a bit like pomegranate?
Absolutely, they did. And in fact, particularly for a generic term, which is astringency, which is translated in the Chinese character se, this concept of se, which reminds a lot in terms of flavor characteristics to the idea of being a tannic wine, a tannin wine, always pops up. But in terms of, this idea of tannins is the idea of tannin that Chinese people have because they drank a lot of tea. So it's that kind of tannicity that transfer to the wines. I think we should never treat the Chinese consumers as people coming from a completely different planet. In a sense, the strategy that they use are similar to the strategy that we use. The difference, though, is what are the products and what are the beverages that these people have been experienced and exposed to. It's a new discovery, it's a new world of products, and the more we're able to generate and push them in this equivalent, probably the better it's going to be. Okay. Do you want me to wrap up?
Yes, thank you. There's been a lot there, but perhaps...
So, in conclusion, Stage 1 of the China Wine Barometer, I think the main takeout is that at this stage, wine is mostly consumed for health and relaxation and to create a friendly atmosphere. probably less for the taste of wine per se, but of course the taste is still important. France leads the top of the mind awareness that Chinese consumers have, but certainly Australia can grow a lot, and I think should grow a lot. Half of the Chinese consumers are aware of the fact that Barossa exists, and they recognize it as an Australian wine region, but then they're not able to relate to Barossa, for example, with something specific. They know it's there, but they don't know what it's really, really famous for. And probably there is some further study to do in that space. In terms of the Chinese lexicon project, the most common terminology are, as I said, generic terminology such as smooth, fruity, sweet, mellow, having a lengthy aftertaste, but also other terms such as fresh, soft, pure, and having a good aroma or a full-bodied wine are also important, but they are elicited a little bit less. Bear in mind, however, these are the results coming from 48 people. I'm not saying in any way that we can claim some sort of statistical significance or of any sort. But again, if you stay tuned with the research that we are currently conducting, we're going to show you something which is much more precise in the next few months. So just be in touch with us. And finally, fruit flavors are more associated with wine rather than vegetable flavor descriptors. We have a lot on our plate, but we are excited about this time, and certainly I look forward to disseminate more results as they can come along to all of you, of course, if you are interested to hear more about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Armando, very much, and thank you to everyone who tuned in today and who's been a part of all three webinars that we've done in this consumer perceptions series. We've had very good feedback. I think it suggests there is an interest out there in getting research direct from the researchers, and hopefully you can do something with it. We'll be continuing the consumer perceptions theme again next year. I think there's another question.
Yeah.
We've just got a question. A recent bank survey I read listed Chinese perceptions of Australian agriculture as being pristine, about the environment, innovation, quality producers. I had expected to see this in these results.
True. I mean, but bear in mind we were asking something different. In this survey, we were looking specifically at the product. So we were looking specifically at wine. In the other project they were actually doing in terms of the perception the Chinese consumers have about Australia, okay, as a country, and within that, in the wine umbrella, then I totally agree with you. We found that Australia is still famous and is known for being a environmental friendly place with beautiful beaches, great sunshine, and so on and so on. But the focus of this questionnaire, the focus of this study was specifically into the product.
And another late question, James has asked, in saying not vegetable flavour descriptors, might this include herb or spice descriptors?
The herbs and spices comes as a third type of descriptors. When it comes to herbs and spices generally, we find that it's more the generic spice. The idea of having a spicy wine is the element that comes up. But, for example, we are conducting now in the third study, the wine education study. What we have done so far was we run two waves of this project. What we do with that is really a wine education program that we run with Chinese students, Asian students, but most of which are Chinese, in Australia. In phase one, we found that an education by region of origin seems to work better than an education based on grape variety to increase the likability, willingness to pay, and perceived price point of Chinese consumers, of Chinese students. The second stage was exactly to look at what if we use Western terms or Chinese terms to educate Chinese students in Australia? We found that some of them, and when we train them and when we communicate to them about specific spices or herbs such as cloves, pear anise, etc., they pick it up. So it's not just spicy, but also some herbs like lemongrass or, for example, as I said, cloves, pear anise, and a few other spices. Another question.
I think you've essentially answered that as much a question as a comment. There are 3,000 mainland Chinese students in Adelaide. We should be giving them a good time.
Sure. Look, already this program lasts for 2 sessions. What we've done so far, as I said, was we already educated in one here. We've run this program, which is a 5-session course. So it's a traditional, if you like, wine education program. 5 sessions. The student comes the first time to try some wines, again, sensory characterized by the AWRI, blind. Then they do 3 sessions with us, with a course, and then they come back and they try these wines blind again. We do a traditional scientific experiment, so some students receive wines in one way and education in one way, or another in a different way. So far, we have more than 220, I think, students that participated to all the 5 events. So not including the people that drop out because they didn't want to continue anymore. But there is one thing I think that it's important. The 3,000 mainland Chinese students or Asian students that are here have been exposed not just to our wines, but also to our culture. Fantastic, but it's a different type of consumers than those that we might have in China, because most of the people that we have in China might not have this exposure to the Australian wine industry and the Australian wine culture. So there is an acculturation fact that we need to take into account, and that might, I cannot say that already, but I cannot say it yet, but it might generate some different results due to different level of exposure.
Great, good point to end. Thank you, Armando. We've got a lot of interest in both these topics. I'm sure there'll be people will be waiting for the next phase, certainly, of the Chinese Lexicon project next year. Thank you again, everybody, for attending. Please take the time, as I finish, an exit survey will appear on your screen. It won't take you long to complete. It would really help us to gauge how these sessions are being received. And those who fill in the exit survey will be directly sent a link to the first report, the China Wine Barometer. I also encourage you to if you want to be more in touch with what the GWRDC is doing, to become a part of our Innovators Network. You are then sent regularly links to new research and updates to read as you will. And also, of course, I must finish by encouraging you, if you're not a member of Wine Communicators of Australia, please consider doing so. We're about becoming a communications conduit for this wine industry to get research and ideas flowing. Membership is very good value, and you get to have some really good parties as well. So thank you again, Armando and Jen. Sorry, one last point.
Yeah, one last point, if you also want to follow us in terms of Ehrenberg-Bass Institute or myself, on Twitter we are at Ehrenberg-Bass or at Dr. Corsi with an R, not Corsi. maybe because it's today Corsi on Twitter, and we look forward to have many more followers.
Terrific. That's all for today. Thank you, everybody.